Happy New Year and welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world, with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
Now, Mr. Churchill described the former Soviet Union as a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. If so, North Korea has to class as the most mind-twisting Rubik's Cube, wrapped inside a paradox. The most secretive country on the earth has much to be secret about. Surrounded by hostile nuclear-armed bases, sometimes known as countries, Japan and South Korea, which have previously invaded, leaving up to 1/3 of all North Koreans dead, and all within the lifetime of many watching this. So, no wonder North Korea has adopted the porcupine approach and bristles with many sharp spears. Thus, it will never be invaded again, or so we hope. Power has passed, apparently seamlessly, from the great leader Kim Il-sung to the dear leader Kim Jong Il, and now to his younger son Kim Jong Un. I say apparently seamlessly because recently there has been a very domestic difficulty involving the young Un and his uncle, although they're keen to point out that Uncle Jang is not only factionalist filth and human scum, he never actually really was an uncle. Joining me now to make sense of all this is Britain's foremost China and North Korea expert, Keith Bennett, who with me more than a decade ago was responsible for the establishment 50 years after we invaded Korea of diplomatic relations between the two countries. Keith, very good to see you again. Let's start with this question of the uncle. They say actually he wasn't an uncle. Tell us how.
Well, in Korean terms, the way they understand family relations, he wouldn't be regarded as an uncle because he's not a blood relative of Kim Jong Un. He was married to Kim Jong Un's aunt, the sister of Kim Jong Il, although it's also understood that the two of them had not been living together for some years up to now.
So close but no cigar as such. But it is nonetheless quite an extraordinary turn of events. Every country has factional problems, including our own, but they don't always lead to someone being executed, even in North Korea. Did they deal with him harshly? How serious were the crimes that he committed?
You've made a very interesting point in that these things don't always end up this way in North Korea. In fact, you have to go back to the 1950s before you can find anything remotely comparable to what's happened. And of course, in that time, many officials have come up, they've been promoted, demoted and dismissed. And indeed, Jang himself was dismissed from all his posts on at least 2 previous occasions over the years, and subsequently was brought back and given another chance and even given more power. It is, on the face of it, a very harsh outcome, but it is actually an unusual one. I think it seems very harsh in a European context. As you know, there's only one country left in Europe that still maintains the death penalty, although if there was a referendum in this country, I think you and I both know the way that the popular vote will go on that particular one. But the death penalty, on the other hand, is endemic in much of the rest of the world, not least the United States of America. And the United States government, which obviously loses no opportunity to attack and denigrate the government in North Korea, said that the execution of Jang illustrated the brutal and inhuman nature of the regime there. Now, that's all very well, but this is the same US administration whose Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, quite probably the next Democrat candidate for president, was able to gloat at the very public lynching of another head of state, Muammar Gaddafi, saying that we came, we saw, he died. So I think you have to put some of the international reaction into that context. As for the crimes, he was, of course, accused and found guilty of treason, and at least according to the official reports admitted the crimes. It was said that he'd tried to get more and more of the national economy under his control, with a view to wrecking the economy, ruining the people's living standards, and ultimately staging a coup. This would obviously be considered treason in any country, and particularly in North Korea, which, as you said, rightly sees itself as being in a state of siege with a situation still outstanding from the Korean War, which finished in 1953 only with an armistice and still no peace treaty.
Of course, many people's only interest in Korea, unlike yours and mine, is whether or not the situation is stable. This is a nuclear-armed state with a huge military, and so the question arises, is Kim Jong Un securely in power?
Well, that's an inevitable question after what's happened. But the fact that it has happened and things are going on, to me, gives greater credence to the idea that things will be more stable now than they were hitherto. Certainly, since the purging of Jang, Kim Jong Un has kept up a very hectic program of all sorts of public engagements, and everything else in Pyongyang has been business as normal. One
of his now regular visitors is a good friend of mine, Dennis Rodman, the giant American basketball player. He seems to have fallen in love with North Korea. Tell us.
He does, and I guess that North Korea sometimes has that effect on people, not least because the reality of the country, and although like every country it has its problems, but the reality of the country is not the same as the hostile media presentation. And indeed, sometimes the hostile media presentation does people a favour when they go there, because maybe their expectations are so low that things are inevitably a lot better than what they were expecting. But I find that Dennis Rodman, Kim Jong Un relationship, friendship indeed. Dennis Rodman famously said on his first meeting to a full stadium, "You have a friend for life," and he seems to be keeping to his word. I find that friendship very interesting on a number of levels. It certainly shows that from the top in North Korea, from the very top, and contrary to what we are told in the West, that certainly, at least on a people-to-people level, North Korea is open to having normal and indeed friendly relations with other countries, including the United States of America. Another thing it feeds into is the long history of a relationship between African Americans and North Korea. Kim Il-sung, the present leader's grandfather, was a great friend of the Black Panther Party. And it also shows Kim Jong Un is very interested in sports, we know that, but it shows a great appreciation of the fact that sport can be used to break down barriers and build international understanding. We all know about that, how Nelson Mandela used that with the Rugby World Cup, thanks to the film Invictus. We can recall the ping-pong diplomacy that opened the door to relations again between the United States and China. And some viewers will remember the 1966 World Cup, where at least in Middlesbrough, the North Koreans were a huge hit among ordinary English people.
I'm sorry to tell you, I remember it only too well. They beat Italy 1-0. They were 3-0 up against Portugal before the great Eusebio overhauled that, and Portugal ran out winners in the end. But the North Korean football team in 1966 at the World Cup were a huge hit.
But aren't the ladies' team of the football in North Korea very good?
Oh, they're excellent. And amongst North Korean men, it seems to be a mixture of half admiration and half, I guess, a bit of mild jealousy that North Koreans love football, and the fact that they've been in 2 World Cups notwithstanding, they feel, though, that the men are not really such good footballers, but that the ladies are brilliant. The North Korean women's team did exceptionally well in the Asian Cup, and of course they were particularly proud that they beat the United States, which obviously has
gave them quite a beating.
Great resonance. And last year, the ladies' football team from Middlesbrough, who all went out, who were all amateurs, went out and played some exhibition and friendship games in North Korea against the North Korean ladies. By all accounts, the Middlesbrough ladies had a fantastic time. And I think the North Koreans are trying to send their ladies back here on a reciprocal visit.
And what about the state of children? What about the education and the health records?
Well, I think if you put this into historical perspective, before 1945, Korea was a Japanese colony. And when Korea was liberated, the country had just a handful of university graduates. So all of this work began from scratch. And the very first factory that was built in North Korea after the Japanese were expelled was a pencil factory, which I think gives an indication of the priorities. North Korea was one of the very first countries, if not the first in Asia, to achieve 100% literacy. And they've always attached huge importance to education and to healthcare. Just 1 year ago, Kim Jong Un made a policy announcement, which is in the process of being implemented, which will institute 12-year universal and, of course, free education in Korea. And besides the schooling system, you can go to places like the School Children's Palace in Pyongyang, where some of the facilities that are available for children for after-school activities would really be the envy of Eton and Harrow. Though, of course, not every educational establishment is like that throughout the country, not by any means, but it gives an indication of what they're aspiring to. I think the other context in which we have to put this is that from the mid-1990s onwards, we had a series of economic difficulties in North Korea, which were occasioned by the collapse of the Soviet Union, which the Soviet Union and the other East European countries in Comecon had accounted for the overwhelming bulk of North Korea's trade, and many of the inputs in fertilizer and raw materials for their economy were dependent on that. Suddenly that was taken away, and they had a whole series of natural disasters year after year, floods, droughts, typhoons, and so on. And these have inevitably had a negative impact on education and particularly on healthcare. But throughout that time, unlike in other countries, including much wealthier countries than North Korea, education up to university level has remained free, and all types of healthcare have remained free. And the head of the UN World Health Organization, a Chinese lady from Hong Kong, Dr. Margaret Chan, did a very interesting report on healthcare in North Korea, which is well worth reading, which acknowledges the problems, but at the same time points out that in many respects North Korea still remains a model for developing countries in terms of universal provision of healthcare, which remains something to which they're politically committed, even if there are some problems in delivery at the moment.
Well, Keith, we're going to have to leave it there, but it's time you and I made a return visit to Pyongyang. We'll have to go and check it out. We'll ask Dennis to come with us.
That'll be fun.
We'll have a whale of a time. Keith Bennett, thanks very much for joining us on the Sputnik.